Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss some of the points arising from Boris Johnson's first day of testimony to the COVID inquiry. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I wasn't sure whether it'd be Boris Johnson or Suella Braverman this evening. But Braverman's attempt to keep herself in the driving seat today can keep until tomorrow now. So back to the COVID inquiry, and Boris Johnson was giving evidence today. He was under oath. Did he avoid telling obvious lies then? No. Presumably he's had enough instruction on how to avoid meeting the bar required for perjury charges though. The lies he told seemed to run along the lines of no, yes, no. Then he's shown the proof and goes, oh, sorry, I forgot. For example, at one point, the lead counsel, Hugo Keith KC, was asking about the toxic culture in Downing Street, which was preventing some top talent working for them. Johnson denied having been told about this alleged toxic atmosphere. Keith responded by referring to WhatsApp messages about it, and then Johnson insisted. He said, no, you're wrong. He said, the message you're referring to says that I was told about it, but it's not a message directly to me. At which point Keith then reads out a message from the cabinet secretary, who was Mark Sedwell at the time, directly to Boris Johnson, telling him about it. At which point Johnson was trapped and simply replied, oh, I'm sorry, as if he'd just conceded a debating point, not being found to have given false information to a public inquiry under oath. In the afternoon session, the issue of the toxic atmosphere was picked up again. Johnson said the atmosphere could sometimes be argumentative, but he said that's no bad thing. He said he'd rather have a situation where people can be challenged and feel free to say things than an atmosphere where people pretend all is well. Nearly spat my drink out. In every PMQs where Starmer was needling him about something, his consistent approach was to demand that Starmer say all was well. In several PMQs, he directly challenged Starmer to tell the public that all was well, especially regarding the piss-poor measures in schools, as a way of boosting public confidence. Oh, you're upsetting the public. He did. He'd said it so many times. You're upsetting the public by having a go at me. Tell them everything's fine. Do it for the country. Pretending all was well was the overriding feature of Johnson's period of government. If Johnson's government had a mascot, it would be that dog in the house fire. He also reverted to his incompetence and laziness defence over negligence. He did this during Partygate quite a bit. You know, after he'd get himself trapped by Starmer in a sequence of PMQs, he decided that the best defence was to claim that he was just stupid, that he didn't understand the legislation that his own government passed about social and work gatherings. Many of us made the point at the time. If Johnson deliberately broke his own rules, he's unfit for office. He recognises that, so he said, oh, I didn't deliberately break them, I was just too stupid to know what they were. But if Johnson's too dumb to understand the rules that he discussed and approved and explained to the public regularly on the television, he's still unfit for office. It was the same here. He was asked if he'd read the SAGE minutes. That's the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. So these are the records of meetings with the government's top scientific advisors for, in this particular case, COVID. Now, if he admitted to reading them, he'd presumably be asked an awful lot of awkward questions about recommendations and advice given in those meetings, which he routinely ignored. So he decided that laziness was a better defence than negligence. So he said, I only read one or two of them. So the idea that he was led by the science at all times was looking a bit ropey. Led by the science, didn't even read what the scientists had to say. And there was another change from 2020 as well. So in one quite interesting exchange, Keith refers to a message from Dominic Cummings to Boris Johnson, in which Cummings claims that Whitehall's nearly killed huge numbers of people and cost millions of jobs, and that Hancock had failed to sort out the testing issues. Johnson replied in his message to Cummings, March 2020, totally effing hopeless. Now, Keith made the point that this was a reference to an important part of government. Then Johnson made 2 points. First, he said that he would stress the word nearly. So Boris Johnson wants it to be clearly understood that the dysfunctional system he was managing only nearly managed to kill huge numbers of people and cost millions of jobs. He only nearly turned a disaster into a catastrophe. We're apparently supposed to be pleased about the distinction. And second, he tried to redefine what the job of Prime Minister was, to remove his own responsibility and dump it on others. But as part of doing that, said that it was not for him to just uncritically accept that what they were doing was good. And I thought, good? He used the word good. In 2020, the word good was not used by Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson kept insisting that we were world beating or world leading, depending on his mood that day. But it was always world something. Keir Starmer at one point, after having months of this, got tired of it all and said, look, we don't need world beating. We just need a system that works. Now, Johnson doesn't even seem to accept that what they were doing was even good at the time. His own assessment of the performance of his government has come down a little bit in 3 years, hasn't it? From world beating to, actually, it wasn't even all that good, was it? But the response was designed to make others responsible. When people point out that, first Johnson and lately Rishi Sunak never take responsibility, this is it on show here. Everything is someone else's fault. He attempted to throw his entire cabinet under the bus at one point by saying that they were much more opposed to the lockdowns than he was, as if the delays were their fault. Not only forgetting who actually makes the big calls like this, but you don't ignore your cabinet, of course you don't. But when it comes to a really big call like this, that is the Prime Minister. But also his cabinet didn't really have much say. They were no better informed than most of the rest of us through most of the time. And on the issue of the missing WhatsApp messages, so people have been already asking, what's going? There's basically a load of WhatsApp messages missing for the whole of that, for months at the start of COVID. And Johnson attempted a pub ball level speculation that the messages must have been automatically deleted. I don't know what happened to them. They must have been automatically deleted. Cue a load of tech security experts out in force saying this was all a load of bollocks. Indeed, one made the point that they're designed not to allow accidental deletions. I'm assuming this means the inquiry has been unable to obtain those messages. Whatever he has done to avoid handing them over seems to have worked. My money's on it's being an attempt to obscure messages to Russian contacts. For example, there was a brief question, there was only one, there was no follow-up, about Johnson's face-to-face meeting with Evgeny Lebedov at a time when you weren't supposed to be having face-to-face meetings. This is Lebedev's the Russian oligarch who owns the Independent and whom Johnson rammed into the Lords against the advice of the Appointments Committee and Security Services. So Keith asked about this meeting. And Johnson said, it's important to meet these newspaper owners to make sure they knew what was going on. But as The Guardian noted in their live feed at the time, Johnson didn't meet other newspaper owners face to face. It was much more likely to be related to his peerage. But Keith didn't pursue it. His focus, after all, is handling of the pandemic. It is not, although we are getting lots of information about Tory corruption here, which many of us interested in politics are interested in, that is not the purpose of the inquiry. So, he didn't press it. Later on, Johnson said he regretted calling long COVID bollocks and saying it was basically Gulf War syndrome. He claims he was trying to get to the truth of the matter. This does not wash. Someone trying to get to the truth of the matter asks questions. They do not write down uneducated, uninformed conclusions. That is the action of someone who is only interested in others accepting their truth. Finally, I will just say this. The Bereaved Families Group were describing the media as covering for Johnson in failing to report the COVID inquiry properly. There's been, I've discussed this briefly, I think maybe in one of my shorts. The fact that there's some figures in the media are trying to attack the COVID inquiry. Say, you don't need it now. Yes, you've explored some things. Can we get on with improvements now? We don't need the rest of the inquiry. I would say they're probably out slightly in their assessment that they're just covering for Johnson. I think some in the media undoubtedly are covering for Boris Johnson. But I think most are covering for themselves. They are motivated to attack the COVID inquiry because it is highlighting things that they should have been reporting on at the time. Now, yes, they wouldn't have seen all the WhatsApp messages, but those are just further evidence for what was known at the time. Had the mainstream media reported on the government's role in COVID properly, critically, and in the public interest, it is certain, beyond reasonable doubt, it is certain that the scrutiny would have forced the government to make better decisions. We have numerous examples over the last few years where media scrutiny on an issue has forced the government to make better decisions. It just almost never happens because the media are very rarely interested. There is almost as much blood on the hands of many of the country's top editors and media owners as there is on Johnson's. Johnson is ultimately responsible, of course, but the media enabled his behaviour. These editors and their staff are desperate to avoid the public ever thinking about that. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.